So if I want a deep conversation with a cashier, I'll tell a stupid story about myself and then shut up. And then she'll probably do the same thing, or at least comment in some interesting manner about what happened to me. And then it's immediately you elevate the conversation. Elevate, maybe not the right word, but you move the conversation from the talking about mundane, and to a more interesting stuff that like what you are as human beings.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia, somewhere in the Caucasus Mountains. In Europe. Yeah, this is Europe. I don't care what other people say. Nor does anyone else here. I think it's Europe, they think it's Europe. And yeah, it could be considered Asiatic, but no, it's Europe. Okay, enough of that. Today we have another in our series of Anadromous dialogues, and we have someone I met at the Bridges of Meaning festival. They call it a festival, but really it was like a conference in Landau, Germany back in August. And it's a guy named Teddy Emilyan from Israel. And he's been threatening to come visit Georgia since, out of all the people I met there, he was the closest. And we had an excellent conversation. I enjoyed talking with him there, and I thought I would introduce you to him here. We also get into the subject of what exactly makes a good dialogue, a good conversation. How do you enter into a dialogue with someone? And what sustains it? So that, among other, we just kind of let the conversation drift, and it drifted into some interesting corners. So, Teddy and Byrne talking now. Okay, so let me introduce you. This is Teddy. I don't know if you want your last name to be known. Do you care?
I don't care. No, Emilyan.
Okay, so I was going to ask you. It's like Emilyan. Is that
so? I'll introduce myself in that manner. So I was born in Russia, in a city that no longer exists, kind of. And because it just got its name changed, so I was born in Leningrad. And we still call it Leningrad in our house, but it's no longer there. And as this happened to the city, happened with me as well. So I was born Fyodor Emilyanov, and so I no longer have that name.
You're in Israel.
Yes.
You're Jewish.
No.
No, you're Armenian.
No, I'm Russian.
Okay, you're just Russian, because that's Emilyan. It has to be an Armenian last name.
Emilyanov. So the end is of, but I changed it a few years ago. I had a itch since my early teenage years to do something with it.
All right. And well, that's interesting. I kind of assumed for some reason that because you were in Russia, in Israel, that you were probably Jewish, but evidently not. So that's fine.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you are, your education, and how you ended up. Like I know you interacted with some of the other people that are loosely connected to this channel.
Yeah. So we came to Israel when I was 5, and we are considered in Israel the Nuremberg Jews. So it means that by the Nuremberg laws, we are Jews, but by all the other traditions, we are not. Although because of some mishap or some kind of what happened during those times when people are fleeing one country and moving to another, we still registered as Jews in all of the books in Israel. So, but we all of us know that now, like my father is 100% completely Russian, my mother is only half. So in that sense, it's a very weird way of how the people in Israel perceive themselves, especially the immigrants. And that's kind of a big issue here in Israel, because Israel, out of 10 million people, 3 million are Arabs and 1.5 million Russians. And 1.5 million Russians, that most of them are in my position. So they kind of a Nuremberg Jews. And yeah, so I perceive there's going to be or will be a certain problem with that in Israel in general, because people do seek their own ethnicity and their own roots. And it will be a certain problem. I don't know how, but I just feel kind of that happening with myself, as I'm the corner in the mind that singing this song of something that happening in Israel.
Well, especially in these times where we've got more tribal identification going on with in the world, it seems. People saying, "Oh, I want to be among the people I'm like."
Yes, but not only that. Like this, during the 20th century, Russians is the biggest European immigration in the world. Maybe probably after the Chinese or the Indians, but they are less represented in the West as Russians compared to their own population. So it means that a huge injection of Russian culture came to the Western countries. And so maybe this is why the reason that Orthodoxy is becoming in vogue right now to convert to. Maybe this is why this idea of suffering that coming from Dostoevsky is so prominent in a lot of countries. I don't really know, but I do feel those forces that playing in the Western mind that is definitely from my culture.
Sure. Well, there's been different waves, I know, in America, and there was an early 20th century wave of which you had Russians and Ukrainians and Jewish people all kind of coming together. And obviously they were Russian Jews and coming together. There was a section I used to live in New York that was predominantly Ukrainian, but if you walked a little further, it was Russian. This was in the early 20th century. And there were people who also fled the Russian Revolution who came. But then all immigration kind of dipped after the 1920s. There was a law passed in America about immigration and dipped. And so this is the period in which America really, you kind of hit the classic American period, because, you get film noir and you get Westerns in the movies, and you get all of these different aspects that people kind of look at as kind of classic American culture. And it isn't until the late 1940s, you have many Russian Jews who are coming to America. And of course, they have a special pass because of the Holocaust. Then you get a situation where the immigration laws change in the mid-1960s. And then you start to get more Jews, but you still don't get, not more Jews, more Russians. You still don't get that many.
You remember the period during the 70s where there are a lot of Russians come, and especially to New York. So
right. And so you tended to get Russians and Russian Jews coming, people who then could claim to be refugees of some sort.
Yeah,
or,
like Solzhenitsyn was during that time,
and many others.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the beginning of the wave. And then, but what happens is by the end of the 1980s, it's much greater. And then in the 90s, bam, lots more, because now the borders are technically open.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me is how our view of Russians changed. So, for instance, if you were talking to someone about Russian women in 1985, they might tell you, oh, they're all like Olga, the brickyard worker who's, or the person who rides the tractors or something.
Yeah.
They're looking back at the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and there were all these comedians who made these kinds of jokes, and some of them were quite fascinating. Then, as soon as the 90s came, suddenly everyone's looking for Russian brides. Russian women are the most beautiful women in the world, and the whole image of what a Russian is. So it goes from then, and also on the other end, it goes from the Russians are all, the Soviet soldiers and the KGB, Dolph Lundgren, who's not Russian, obviously, in Rocky, and you have this image. And then it switches around the same time to Russian men are all in the mafia.
Yes, and also an interesting movie that presented a different way of presenting the Russian woman in the 90s was, I don't remember exactly how it called, but I remember Nicole Kidman played this part for, I think it was a young man who going to Russia to buy a bride, and then he bride a bride, and basically they con him in a certain manner. And I still think about that movie from time to time, which is this idea of going to the East to get yourself a bride.
Well, there's
because
actually
more traditional, and also because the beauty aspect of it. And actually, the one thing that happened during the 90s, and it's still prevalent in Russia, is schools for being a good wife, being a good companion to your very powerful man. So basically, a lot of Russian women looking to upgrade their status and don't shun away from that as something as demeanor as the as it perceived in the West, as something that an escape from a certain bad situation for them. And kind of also a win-win situation for everybody. So it's a very interesting image that changed. But later in 2000s, the image changed even more, that they just really high class prostitute, high class gold diggers. So this image also started to be very prevalent.
Yeah, well, one thing I noticed, there's actually a whole, there's not just that movie. That was the movie with Ben Chaplin. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But there were, I've counted about 4 or 5 of those films. There was a little mini genre of Russian bride movies, and or something related to that. Yeah, later, what also started happening was in Russia there were these different organizations, Russia and Ukraine. There were different organizations that took control of the matchmaking process and then realized they could get money out of it. And some of them, well, they acted pretty strange. So after a while, a person would never know if they were really communicating with someone or if it was all an elaborate scam. And out of this, I think you started getting the Russian horror model, and that they're all just, you can't trust any of them. Of course, it's not one or the other. It's much more complicated.
Yeah.
But it made it much more difficult. Interestingly enough, that was also around the time early Putin years. And so, our relationship with Russia was changing again. And what was, I think, legitimate to some degree in the 90s with the collapse of the Russian economy was then changed again in the early aughts during the Putin period. And and then we are wherever we are. Interestingly enough, I think on some level, Russia was never doing better than it was, that is, say, economically, was never doing better than right before the invasion. That is, I think that, I would see these YouTubers just kind of going around Russia, and things seem somewhat normal. And
I will push 5 years before that. So I will say before Maidan. So I'll say 2013.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that now it's all going backwards again,
Yeah.
and it's going to keep going backwards until something resolves somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
So the tension that existed in me and my family is when we moved to Israel. Israel is a very interesting also melting pot on different cultures. And when we arrived in the beginning of the 90s, the Israeli basically founded by Jews communists from Europe. So basically, it's a very social country with a lot of rules toward agriculture, toward social fairness, and et cetera, et cetera. And it changed a little bit during the 60s, 50s, and 60s when a lot of the Holocaust Jews started to arrive, which were completely different beast from the communist Jews, and also from Arab countries, Jews from Arab countries that also introduced a kind of regional. They introduced the culture that it's part of the region into this weird Israeli mix. So when we arrived in the 90s, a lot of Russians were looking for jobs, and a lot of the jobs were in this periphery of Israel. So my mother found a job in the University of Ben Gurion in the Negev, so it's in the south of Israel. Go ahead, yeah.
I just wanted you to define what a Nuremberg Jew was for people who don't know.
Yeah, go ahead. So Nuremberg Jews are the Nuremberg laws. I don't remember exactly the date. Probably it's 38. That they derived this notion what a Jew is. So a Jew is anybody who has a grandfather or a grandmother that is Jewish. So they don't care about by the halacha, which is the Jewish law of what you consider Jewish, which is only if your mother is Jewish, full Jewish, then you consider Jewish. So basically, your father can be a goy, non-Jewish, but you still will consider part of the community. So the Nuremberg laws attributed who is considered. So this is why a lot of people in Germany who were ethnically German, maybe they had some kind of Jewish blood, but those people who were maybe even converted to Catholicism or Protestantism, and they still will consider Jews because they have one ancestor who is Jewish. So so this is a very interesting, because in Israel you still have a lot of laws that is attributed only to that you can do only if you are Jewish. So, for example, you can get married only in the Rabbanut, which is the institutions, the religious institutions for marriage, and also for the kashrut and how to eat everything. And you can get married there only if you're a Jew. So what happened with the 40% of the population who was not Jews? Well, basically, they need to go abroad to get married. So before the 2005, something like that, most of the marriages for those people, they just go to a lawyer, and this lawyer will marry them in another country. So people get married in Uruguay without leaving the country. And there's a lot of those couples. But after 2005, maybe even later, you have to move to go to Prague. A lot of people go to Prague to get married, or to Cyprus, and then you come back to Israel, and then you consider married, just because you're not Jews. So a lot of the Russians have experience with that. So it does matter the fact that you are Jewish in Israel. Most of the other civic laws, they don't care, but then again, there is a mildness of it's not called the racism, but Byrne, help me here. It's called when when a certain minority is excluded. So so exclusion, right? So exclusion of certain people in Israel. It's a very light element, so it's not, you won't be prohibited to enter some places just because you're Arab, but it's just like you'll be looked at. Will be a certain weirdness, so it's
and so it makes you sort of a, as we would say in America, second-class citizen.
Sure, I won't go too far to call it like that far. No, I won't call it that. But it is an existed one. So, for example, one of the elements that we actually, after 9/11, most of the countries in the world adopted the way of screening people to airports from Israel. So we have a very robust system of how we do it here, and they start to copy it all over the world. And in America, what they're doing this true randomness test. So like you get into the computer and then they take this old grandmother, Jewish grandmother from Brooklyn, and they start to search her. It will never happen in Israel, because Israel is like using this like light racism or light exclusion to actually screen for people who are dangerous. So who is dangerous to Israel? Probably male, probably from the age of 20 to 30, and probably Arab-looking or darkish skin-looking people. So they will be more questioned than a person that looks like a Danish.
In America, we have to always kind of present this idea that you can't, you have to be totally fair. But of course, that creates such things as my mother is coming out of an operation. She's in a wheelchair, and they put her through far more screening than, and this is to like enter Alaska.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, come on, think for a minute. How many Arabs are getting on a plane in Seattle to go to Alaska to do anything, you know, or whatever? How many terrorists?
So we as an Israelis look at that and look at those screenings that happened after 9/11, and it's just idiocy. It's like you're not using your common sense.
Right. But that has to do with the larger
implications
related to the divisions in our society and here. So people are so afraid of looking at all like they have some favorability on a certain group that they will then completely
correct.
Overcorrect, and it gets very bizarre.
Yes.
So tell me about tell me a little bit about your education.
Okay, so I lived in a far place in Israel, and I went to the same university as my parents worked at, in the University of Ben Gurion. I started to study physics, and I studied for 2 years. My dream was to become an astrophysicist or astronaut, not astronaut, sorry, the person who explores the heavens. Astronomer, astronomer, and to work at NASA, and it was a very big dream of mine. And the department was really struggling financially, and they treated us as labor more than they as a students, and it was very unwelcoming environment, and also very, very, very difficult to excel or even to survive. So we knew out of the 100 people that get into the department, only 20 finished the bachelor degree, and I wasn't one of them. So I got banned from the university. I got in a big depression. I went to the United States. I worked as a lot of Israelis in selling paintings, from Chinese paintings, from door to door. I felt horrible. It was probably the lowest point in my life. And it was after the economic crisis that it was in 2009. And also I had dreams about US beforehand. So because of my background, I never felt at home in Israel. And basically I'm trilingual. So I speak 3 languages every single day. I usually, how I divided it is like my emotional language, and my weakest is Russian. And this is I like children in Russian. I don't like them in other languages. The language that I need to draw and shoot something really fast is Hebrew, because this is my revolver on my belt. And my intellectual language is English. So I read only in English, I listen only to English stuff, and basically I live my intellectual life in English. So those language, so I had this conflict in me always, and United States was an ideal for me to immigrate sometime in my future. And a lot of my peers was the same, is to leave Israel. Why? Because there is a certain unacceptedness that we felt, a lot of the Russians felt in Israel. So the longing to leave was really, really strong. A lot of them will say it will because economic reasons, because Israel is basically an island, and that's why all of our products is 30-40% more expensive than anything that you can get in the West. And so a lot of them wanted to immigrate, and a lot of my friends did. And I had this longing again as well. So I didn't manage to. When I went to the United States, I felt disillusioned and disgusted by that culture. Although I had family there and visited it from very early age, during that time, 2010, I stopped seeing it as a dream of mine. And it's also this I kind of felt broken by this dream of becoming a physicist, and a dream of like moving to the States. And I was adrift for a few years in Israel. I worked as a bartender and a waiter for many years. And the person who started to build me up again was Joe Rogan. So I started to listen to Joe Rogan, and it was a very early days of Joe Rogan. So I came across him when he was on episode 110 or something. And I found there an outlet. I found there a person who is encouraging me in the right directions. And I started doing difficult stuff. I started to explore my physical abilities, and start improving my health, improving my emotional state. And I went to do the Israeli route. So the Israeli route going from the from the north of Israel to the south, and they took me a month and a half. And during that time, I was walking alone, me and my tent, just thinking a lot, listening to podcasts and thinking a lot. And I found that every time that I found somebody on the road, I latched into him and wanted to just have a conversation with him, and found excuses just to be in a conversation with him a little bit longer, because of this longingness and this aloneness in when you're doing this route. And in the end of the route, I asked myself a question: where can I find a place where I can talk with interesting people about interesting ideas? And the question and the answer to the question was very apparent to me. It was like, in the philosophy department. So I returned to my home back then in Tel Aviv, and went to Tel Aviv University to study philosophy. And I've been there for.
Was it a certain kind of philosophy?
Yes. So basically, I really fast gravitated toward rhetoric, so language and rhetoric, and I'm a very verbal fluent person, and quite decent storyteller. So I liked this element of conversation and speaking, and I explored during my undergraduate those topics and what is to speak. And one of the maybe most striking lessons that I got from my first year and from my teacher about rhetoric, I asked him. I started to go to the debate clubs and to Tel Aviv Debate Club. It's a very strong and good debate club on an international level. And I asked my teacher, where can I go and be educated in, like, become a better speaker? And I asked him about the debate club, and he said, it's not in the debate club, because in debate clubs, they'll teach you how to win an argument, right, and how to force yourself on the other person. It's not a way. You will never grow out of that. And it struck me because I was kind of invested in that. So I stopped with the debate club, and basically what they said, just study the deep texts and the rhetorical texts and those kind of elements. And a lot of what I did during my my time in the undergraduate was sitting outside the classroom and having a conversation with people, much more than sitting inside the classroom and listening to the lecture. Like, because to the lecture, sure, I can understand what is the allegory of the cave, sure, right. But it's more important to understand how you can take those stories, those philosophical stories, and implement them in a conversation, like with other people. And I found it very helpful and very, very important, this lesson, that an engagement in conversation, this is the most important part of a rhetorical, of a philosophical education and becoming a good rhetorician. So that's basically my kind of education. What?
When you so then you started, I guess, looking around on the internet. You probably maybe heard some people on Joe Rogan's podcast that you followed up on, or maybe how did you end up
here
with Paul Vanderklay? Was there a Jordan Peterson moment, and then that kind of thing?
So Jordan Peterson. So you're right. I come across Jordan Peterson in Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was the Tbilisi 16, and Jordan came about, and I listened to every single episode of Joe Rogan. Some of them, a lot of the time, of them multiple times, and so I was quite. So I listened to a lot of speakers, and I remember Jordan very, very specifically because he actually stopped me and forced me to take the phone and look who it is, because he said something really profound to me back then, to us back then, that after he explored the evil that happening in the Soviet Russia, and how it's how the conclusion of Solzhenitsyn is that the evil is not by some outer forces, but it's the forces within that causes the evil that happening in the world. And in the end, Joe Rogan asked him, okay, so how people can help you, Jordan, in your struggle, that what you have now with the Bill C-16 and the Terenjezo stuff. And he said, improve your own self, start to organize your room, start to try to help the people around you, take responsibility for your own personal life, because when you raise the water, all the bolts was raised with them, and my life will improve as well. That's how Jordan put it. And it influenced me, because he basically said, you can help me by helping yourself. And from then, it was the end of my study in the philosophy, and I became quite obsessed with him for a few years. And I took his advice in doing meditation on evil. So meditation of evil is reading very difficult books and trying to understand, trying to imagine yourself in them and doing those kind of things, and not just doing them, maybe enjoying, maybe desiring doing those evil things. And I've done it for a few times, and I start to feel I stop being able to handle it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to deal with that. And back then, I also started to use quite a lot of weed and to calm down my nerves as well. And it was also after the university, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So there's a lot of different elements.
That sounds like an odd combination.
Yeah,
of using the idea of trying to understand evil in that sort of way with weed. You're going to get some sort of strange.
Yeah. And basically, I went back to Jordan and tried to go over his material and try to find a solution. And he said something interesting that is part of my tradition. He said, "Oh, Tolstoy had the same problem." In his confession, he explored the fact that during his peak of his career, he still wanted to commit suicide. And he asked me why. So I went to the text. First of all, I went to my parents and asked them, "Did you read Confession about Tolstoy?" Right. And in communist countries, you don't allow to read that, so no. So it was kind of a badge of honor for me to try and and read text by Tolstoy that my parents didn't know.
Right.
And in there, it's slowly Tolstoy's journey towards embracing the old tradition of his. Go ahead.
Hold on 1 second. It's getting dark in here.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
clouds have come over. See, does that improve things? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Some. And in the Confession about Tolstoy, this is how he started to get closer and closer to his own tradition, which is also my tradition, which is Christianity and Orthodox Christianity. So this was the first brick that somebody removed from my wall, and I started to kind of think about it, and was more open to a tradition and those oldest elements in our tradition that maybe can be helpful. And another year passed, then I get more and more into Jonathan Pajot, and Jonathan Pajot asked me another very interesting question. Jonathan asked, "Go to your parents' house and look at the symbolism that you grew up with." So this is what I did. I went to my house, and this is not it, but I started to look at all the images, and I found that I counted something like 25 churches, or at least like even magnets with churches on them. I see. And almost non-Jewish symbolism. And I started to think, okay, so did I grow up in a Christian house? The symbolism says, like the symbolic representation that I have in my house show that. So maybe. From then, it was not that far to Paul van der Klee. And although I come across Paul van der Klee's video when Jordan became permanent, I wasn't interested in a pastor's opinion about Jordan Peterson. But after I went to the journey with Tolstoy and Jonathan Pajot, I became more open to it. And I became an avid listener about a year and a half ago, and a participant in the community about a year ago. And it doing something to me. I have no idea what, and I do see a certain changes. And I'm curious about those changes that happening with me and in my life. because of that.
Well, I think all of these people, Peterson, Peugeot, Paul Vanderklay, all have an emphasis on dialogue that's very interesting, and an emphasis on dialogue even with people you don't necessarily agree with. And they each do it in different ways, but I think that and that's where I kind of connect with them as well. I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson, certainly not all of it, but I never had that moment where it was like a revelation to me, because in the 1980s, I went through my own personal things. I'm older than him. And I suppose if I didn't go through those things, I wouldn't be here now, But I had to confront certain things within myself, how I was raised. Many of the things that he suggests doing, I had already just done. And so, nevertheless, I realized he was very smart. For instance, I found Paul Vanderklay by just simply saying, I wonder if there are any Christians who are watching this guy. And so I just typed in Christianity and Jordan Peterson, and up came Paul Vanderklay. The algorithms were much kinder then. They've gone through several changes over the years, and no one knows exactly how to beat the algorithms. If people did, they of course would.
Yeah.
And everyone's always got some idea of, if you do this, you'll be seen more. And maybe that's true, but I'm actually happy with, I've got over a couple thousand people watching my channel, which is fine because I can relate to them more. If I had more people, I suppose I could make more money. But what's more important to me is the connections with people, and it's the human connection, which is what's important always to me. And
yeah, and that's, I wrote you a comment in one of the videos that one of the topics that I want to explore with you is the symbolism of conversation and of dialogue. And since then, by your recommendation, I watched all the symbolism playlist and a lot of the things that you recommended, and I thank you for that. And I do have an interest at what makes a good conversation, because and I'll try to frame it. One of the things that I noticed about Jordan Peterson, and very similar to his advice with Hans Ruchmacher, and that you presented here about how to go to museums. So Hans recommend follow your attention, and when your attention lead you somewhere, you just sit with it. And Jordan Peterson has a very similar advice: is in a conversation, you listen to the other person, but you also paying attention to what the other person said, that you grab and grab your attention. So whatever grab your attention, there's probably things that need to be explored there. So the attention as a leading mechanism in conversation. Is there, it's in one sense, it sounds very I don't know what the word, but not hedonistic, but kind of it's almost like flimsy. You're like following the thing that like grab you at that moment, and you're not rigorously exploring a certain element. So you're not rigorously exploring.
I'm not sure if that particular model works for conversation the same, because what I've noticed is, of course, I can talk all night, and I get the feeling you can talk a while too. So how do you let room for someone else to breathe in there? And sometimes, if you watch all of my videos, sometimes I don't allow enough room, and this has been a problem for me going back into time, that sometimes I get too excited about something, or I get on a track where I've said the same things over and over. And I think one has to listen, because sometimes the other person is trying to communicate something. To me, it's about, when I talk to someone, it should be about them. Now, not in just a daily kind of conversation. But even then, if I invite some friends over, I will kind of let them talk, just kind of back and forth. And then eventually, and this kind of works with the what grabs your attention, but it's for me, it's what grabs my attention that they need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about my attention as much as it's about what's going on with them. And it's not that I'm trying to necessarily fix anything as much as I'm trying to, find out, well, what does that mean when you said that? What is that about? And just kind of explore, open it up a little. And then, but that's dangerous because you never know what they're going to explore.
Mm-hmm.
And are you the person on the other end? If they open some really dark box, what are you going to do with it? And I've been in situations where it has gotten quite intense. And sometimes
what have you what have you done? I'm curious.
Well, it depends. You have to understand it's a dance. You have to understand where the other person is. So when I lived in New York City, I lived in this apartment building for several years. That was a fascinating apartment building with all sorts of very interesting and unusual people in it. One of them was this younger woman at the time, and she was I could tell she then would kind of casually say, "Yeah, I'm a dominatrix." To which, well, that opens up a whole mess of doors. But the way she was talking about it so casually, I knew that she didn't want to open those doors. But then I would meet her again, like we would bump into each other in the hallway. Like I said, this was a very interesting apartment building because the guy next to me was a musician. The guy across the hall from me was a musician. Some of these people had names that somebody might recognize. There was a guy 3 floors up who was an art critic. His girlfriend was both a philosopher and worked as a stripper. Just very strange stuff. So all of it could open up all these conversations. Very New York situation in the Lower East Side. So, but one day she says, we were talking for some reason, and she said, "Yeah, the part I really hate about what I do," and she's talking about being a dominatrix, is having to essentially defecate inside of someone's mouth, which is a pretty nightmarish thing to hear. And you could tell that really broke her up. And I could also tell I don't have the access to that because the way she told it, and given the situation, which was not a fluid situation, it was very specific what was going on. It was just like someone dropped an atomic bomb on me, and I didn't have an ability to deal with it because I think that's how she always. And in New York City, I learned that people who are involved with some of the most darkest kinds of behaviors, whether it's shooting heroin or working as a sex worker or something, will often talk about it in a way to make light of it, or in a way that at a moment when you can't possibly react. This was one of those moments. That is to say, you just hear this thing and you can't possibly react. I ended up moving away from that place. Otherwise, I would have eventually tried to pursue that line, why?
Byrne, you remember how the conversation went after she said it to you? Like how you handle it? Because now you relate your feelings towards that, but you actually been in the moment. You remember?
Well, in the moment, I just very sympathetic about, yes, that is a terrible thing. And we talked for a moment or so about it. But like I said, given that moment, I couldn't really pursue it then. I have discussed things equally as dark with other people. It's not that the subject matter was beyond my comprehension. It was that, given the time and such, and she worked such weird hours that I could never find her. When I was sleeping, she was working, kind of stuff. So and that was, I think, about the last time I saw her, when I was actually in the process of moving away from that building. And when you leave a building in New York, they don't give you the keys to come back.
Yes, but I found, when you're talking about that kind of apartment, I've been in that I've been in that building as well in Tel Aviv, and I found that when I was moving, I heard the most intense stuff.
Right.
That building, because probably my attitude was okay, I'm not going to have to see those people any longer. So I was more edgy, not, I won't say edgy, but first of all, it maybe gave the other people as well the opportunity to talk with me about those specific elements, because you kind of a stranger on a train that you can tell him your story and then he will leave. And this is
Right.
probably why I have this painting of this movie behind me. It's my favorite movie. It's Lost in
What is that?
Translation. It's a scene from Lost
Oh,
in
Lost in
Translation.
Translation. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And my favorite movie, and this is the play on Hitchcock's Two Strangers on the Train. So what happened when two people meet in the train and you actually can share your darkest secrets with him. And I experienced that a few times in my life, those kind of conversation that I know that after we'll say goodbye, I won't see ever this person again.
Right.
And in those situations, I got the glimpse to a true life Dostoevsky stories that people tell you. And Jordan Peterson talks a lot in his practice that he heard that, but not everybody is a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't have people voluntarily, like not voluntarily, but like it's not part of my job. But I do felt that those very difficult situation, those very, very difficult conversation is something that fuel me, not fuel me in a perverse manner of enjoying other people's suffering, but just seeing the scope of human suffering. And by seeing the scope, you kind of have a certain compassion. You cannot put them, because you cannot put them in the box, because you cannot put a category on that specific person. That's
Right.
what makes you, because all, as you said, all like your fuses like get blown by this story. It's in that moment that person become much more human than
Mm-hmm.
not.
Well,
So
yeah, and what we all want is to know that someone could accept us
yeah,
in our darkness.
yeah,
And we all have darkness, and I think that it is a human conversation is a very perilous affair, in the sense that we never know, if you really are involved in a conversation, you never quite know which way it's going. You have to listen. One of the things I love about watching Paul Vanderklay talk, and he doesn't do this every time, but many times he will let someone talk. He'll start saying, "Tell me about yourself," and such. And then all of a sudden there will be, and you can almost see it on his face, a moment when he realizes, oh, the conversation's really going this way. Let's follow that. And I guess that's what I mean by the paying enough attention to the other. Now, it would be great if everybody did that. That is to say, if everyone could interact like a dance almost, where you start realizing, what is this about? Often it's one person more than the other. But I think at the same time, we'd all like to be strong enough to be able to handle that other person's, the things inside of them that are dark, and to say, we accept you. Although the truth is, as soon as you do learn the darkness, there is another part of you that goes, oops, and I don't know. Like there was a guy I was talking to in New York City. I used to work a few hours a week. I would buy and sell record collections, but I would also work for a few hours a week out of this one small independent record store in Soho. And I remember this guy came in and we started having a pretty interesting conversation. And he was a DJ, he said, and he heard me playing some piece of music. I often would play music that I had found at home or something, and I would be playing it there. And he said, "What is that?" And we started talking, and I said, "Well, where do I find it?" I said, "It's just a very weird old piece of music." And he was just like, I'll buy it from you. I said, no, it's just, don't worry, you can find it someday. I mean, especially now, you could probably find that piece pretty easily. But then it came out that he was actually a crack dealer in the South Bronx as we were talking. Now that suddenly puts the guy, it's just like, oh, okay. You're this friendly guy who does DJ stuff, and you're also a predator.
Mhm.
Interesting. Now what do you do with those two bits of information about this guy? And the truth is, many people are much more complicated like that than we first understand. And what I've learned is roll with the punches. When someone tells you something, many people at that point, if they heard that, they would be like, oh, they inside they would be doing this. But I've learned, okay, this is new information. What it does mean, what I've learned is there's a way to trust people. And the way to trust people is not to simply say, Teddy, I trust you. I trust everything about you. I shouldn't trust everything about you. I often, what I do is I start off like this. Person zero. You pick up some clues from the way they look, and you should watch that you don't pick up the wrong cues. That for some reason or another, it's something in your mind that people who always look like X act like X.
Mhm.
But you start off with zero. You don't know them, so you don't know what to trust. You don't know what not to trust. Now, eventually, as you start talking, for instance, I meet you, and I start realizing, oh, Teddy is an interesting guy to talk to. So you raise on my scale of talking.
Mhm.
I don't know if I should ever ask you to borrow like $100, you see,
Yeah.
because that's a whole different area.
Yeah.
And some people are perfectly fine with that. They'll say, just take it. Other people would be like, when are you going to pay me back?
Mhm.
They would be really hard edged about that. And you can tell you've hit something. The same thing with anger. Someone might be a great person to talk to. And then when they get angry, suddenly it's like all bets are off. And you don't know that just on the basis of talking. You don't know these aspects of their personality. You don't know, for instance, just because a person talks well doesn't mean they treat, if it's a man, doesn't mean he treats women well.
Yeah.
There are just all these aspects to a personality so what I look at it just like, okay, your stock is rising in conversation. The rest of it, I couldn't say enough. I could make, after this conversation, I could say, oh, okay, we'll put a little bit more there, a little bit there. But then there might be areas where I go like, I wonder what that was about. How
Byrne,
depressed
but
did he get?
there's a natural tendencies when your stock is rising in one like in a conversation, or you see that the other person is a good conversation partner, you tend to, or at least I will say that a natural tendency to project it into other manners of this personality. So you say, okay, Teddy is a good conversationalist. Oh, maybe also a good roommate, or maybe also a
Well,
good,
you
like,
mentioned something about being depressed. Well, I hear that and go like, okay, we're going to knock a few points down there because I don't know what that means for you.
yeah, exactly.
Because one person's depression is one person may be just called, I was sad because X happened. Someone else's depression might be like scraping the bottom of the ground, wondering where the rope is, So it's like, you don't know when someone says, I just put that in there. I don't know what that was quite about. I mean, we all get kind of depressed. What does that mean?
What? Yeah,
And
because it's a too broad of a category, kind of.
yeah, but also, for instance, if someone says to you, if I meet a woman, and there's a woman I'm thinking about right now that I've met here, we have great conversations, but then she says something like, well, I'm kind of damaged, blah, blah, blah. Well, people don't throw that word out or something like that simply to brag. What they're doing is they're floating out a little balloon. Women love to do this. They're throwing out a little balloon to see if you catch it. If you catch it, you really have to watch how. Because what she's doing is hoisting a red flag over something in her life. And she's doing it in a very casual manner. But if you, for instance, then get emotionally, sexually involved with that person without understanding what that red flag is, the red flag has to be understood before the emotional attachment.
Well, if I need to argue what it is basically, it's I'll call it it's basically a technique that I'm using in conversation as well. You share something personal that reveals your and it had to be truth, or
Right.
you show something personal that shows you that you are human being, vulnerable and kind of incomplete. So you try to show your humanness, and it kind of an invitation to the other side to do the same thing. And it usually very, very, very opened the space for a conversation, for a deep conversation, really fast.
Right.
So
Right.
so if I want a deep conversation with a cashier, I'll I'll tell a stupid story about myself and then shut up, and then she'll probably do the same thing, or at
Right.
least comment in some interesting manner about what happened to me. And then it immediately, you elevate the conversation. Elevate, maybe not the right word, but you move the conversation from the talking about mundane, and to a more interesting stuff that, like, what you are as human beings. So that this woman that you described right now, it sounds that she's doing the same thing, but also she's testing everything. And it's also a test. How well can you deal with my shit and the fact that I'm human? Because from time to time I go and defecate on people, in people's mouth. So
well, let's hope not. But yes, I
yeah,
understand.
how
We don't know.
so how can you deal with that, with a small thing? Okay, now I'm seeing that you know how to keep your shit together. I'll give you a little bit more and a little bit more.
Well, there's also, though, some other things at work here. And one is that because of the nature of human relationships, if a person see, for instance, someone may hoist up the "I'm damaged" flag, which would be just a casual remark somewhere. But that may set off in someone else the flag that says "I'll fix them," which
True.
which is a sign of damage in itself, because they are wanting to get involved with this person because maybe she's attractive or something, not realizing the last person who's going to be able to help this person is going to be the person who is completely emotionally, sexually involved with this person, because chances are the damage is right there.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who reacts to that in a certain way will, we all have these little triggers inside of us that if someone says something, you go like, "Oh, that is so nice," or we hear something, you're like, "Oh, maybe I have something for this person." But if you really don't know the person, my feeling is, as far as love goes, one should never enter into it until you have some reasonable assurance of where their San Andreas fault line lies in their personality, where the thing that will crack them open is. Because until you know whether you would be good for this person or bad for this person, you really shouldn't go press it in a sexual manner, because that involves everything in your essence. And you need to know that what kind of faults this person has, because how do you know if you're good for that person or not? You certainly don't know by love at first sight. You don't know just because you're attracted. That tells you something, certainly.
I think the answer to that, you show it by repetition in time, in developing a relationship in time, and that takes who know how many years. So sometimes, those people, the knight in the shining armor want to rescue this girl who is a troubled one, and they get married, and like the commitment itself, maybe the marriage is not perfect, but it's like still a marriage.
Well, to a little self-confession here, I was back in the aughts. I was looking around, trying to see, well, it's got to be someone for me, kind of thing. And so I got involved with writing to people in different places. At that time, it was writing a bit of internet and such. Wasn't the whole Tinder swipe right thing yet. And so I was in touch with this woman who had like one child, who lived in Estonia, who was also a classical musician. great. She's actually sent me one of her a CD of one of her pieces that she had performed. She was incredible music. So this naturally attracted me, but I was still trying to figure out who she was. So a couple of months go by, and I'm talking, and then she says, well, "I've gone back to my husband." And then she wrote this strange thing to me in an email. It's just like, "You waited too long." To which my response inside was, "No, I didn't.
Mhm.
Not at all. You went back to your husband. You didn't tell me that that was a thing on the table
Yeah.
here."
Mhm.
So because of that, I said, "Oh no, I'm really glad I
Yeah.
didn't."
Yeah.
You know, because your son needs his father. You know, this is already something that's happened. Why would I want to get in the middle of this? Why would I want to have made this messy? Why would I want to have spent thousands of dollars to go to Estonia to meet you when this was hanging over
Mhm.
head the whole time? And that's what I mean about you don't know who people really are. We present ourselves a certain way,
And,
but
and and actually patience and time will if you invest in patience and time, you'll see the other person crack really fast if he
yeah,
putting a certain veneer on his presentation.
yeah.
Then
Well, the internet encourages us, is probably a good way to say it, encourages us all to paint a veneer,
yeah, yeah,
to make a presentation. So, I'm not going to talk to you the same way here that I would talk to you if you were in the room. It wouldn't be that different, I don't think. But for instance, we're probably not going to allow certain emotional things to come up, which are, certain kinds of brick walls for us that we run into in our own lives. Why? That's too personal, and we're not being exhibitionists about ourselves. So what we're doing here is talking on a certain level, which is appropriate for the internet.
hmm
You know, what we would do personally, but then again, one of the great temptations about all this stuff, how many people have probably spent time with a video chat talking with someone thinking they know them, and then said, well, I'm going to come meet you, halfway across the country or the world or wherever, come there, and then suddenly realize, oh, I didn't realize that this person leaves their dishes in a heap. I didn't realize that,
yeah,
they
he eats
wake
with his
up.
mouth open and making
Right.
chewing
All the
noise.
stuff that you didn't see. And I didn't realize they don't shower all the time, or they
Yeah,
shower every day. They're constantly showering and they're obsessed with cleanliness. You can't see any of that
yeah,
online.
yeah.
So
But
you don't
I
really know.
I want to bring back to like the conversation and online conversation, because I do feel there's certain lackness in what Paul is doing in random conversation and what we are doing right now in
Certain flatness, did you say?
no
A lack? Okay.
lackness, yeah. uh,
Something lack.
something is missing, and what my argument, and this is a true again to my conversation with you, this is our second conversation if we consider Landau a
But you see,
one day conversation.
I consider that the real thing, and this is an abstraction away from it.
I will agree with that, but I also want to mention that the repetitions or reoccurring event has it's broadened to you the other person that you are having a conversation with. So the problem with a lot of the conversation that we see the people, the talking heads that we see on YouTube, if it's Jordan Peterson, it's Van de Clay, if it's Joe Rogan, they have one-time encounter with the person, even if it's
Right.
just online, and you see that how the conversations is different if they have a relationship. So Jordan
Right.
Peterson conversation with Viveki is completely different because they know each other for decades,
Right.
and that's what it coming across as well, that this repetition and this reoccurring event of me and you sitting in front of camera having a conversation will change the dynamic between the two of us, even though maybe I don't know about your dirty dishes.
They're okay right now. This morning, no. So, but here's the thing. This is what I realized. For one thing, I say to myself, now I talked to Paul Vanderklay on his channel 5 or 6 times, once on mine. Before meeting him in Landau. But here's what I say. That's the first time I ever met him. Because until you meet someone in the flesh, this is good, but this is still, there's a level of mediation and abstraction between us and each other. Now, there's always mediations in a sense. There's telephones, there's cameras, there's all this stuff, but there's also when you meet someone, when you meet someone for the first time, sometimes you'll meet them at a cafe, or maybe you'll do something. There are institutions, things, it's just like, would you like some coffee? What would you like? Part of what you're doing there is going like, I don't know how the thing with money in you works. And you do find out when you're with someone. I mean, I have one friend who's perpetually low on funds. And you just, after a while, you just say, okay, this is a feature here of this person's relationships at the moment, we'll just say. But you don't learn that until you spend time. But the nice thing about having spent time talking to Paul, see, the talking online is what I would say more ideal. It's the same with the typing online, or the typing can also be more vicious, because there's this, like when people type, they can really get dirty, because there's an extra layer of mediation there, where it doesn't feel so real. Whenever I've been kind of attacked or trolled by someone, my point is keep engaging them and then try to bring them to some sort of sense of the reality that there's another person here and that you're another person. You don't have to agree with me, but why are you pretending like I'm some sort of neo-Nazi or something, which has happened? Why are you pretending that I'm just a complete, someone will just say, yeah, well, you're just an idiot. And I'm like, I don't think if you were sitting in this room right now with me, that would be your first impression. I don't think you'd say that I'm a complete idiot, but you hear these things and you're just like, okay, well, how can we get you to at least recognize some of your responsibility in dealing with someone else? But in this kind of conversation, there's always kind of an ideal going on, because we're talking about ideas. You're not telling me, oh man, I've got to get a taxi and go over here. These kind of common things. You're not saying I've got to paint my room. You're not saying, I have to get to work and my boss is, all these kinds of practical daily kinds of things. We're just talking about ideas, which can make it very unusual when you then meet the person and you find out, oh, all this practical stuff is on them all the time.
Yeah.
You don't have that in your mind. You learn something. Like, for instance, I met Paul Vanderklay. The one thing I had a pretty good idea of was I wasn't going to get a chance to sit and talk with Paul alone.
Yeah.
Which I would have really wanted to do. But I said, there are maybe 35 other people here who want to talk to Paul alone. So I'm not putting myself at the head of the line here, and I got a chance to talk a bit more with Job and John Van Donk because we stayed together. But then, even then, it was like, as in a group setting, I was with Paul and such. And it's easy to think that you have a certain access to someone because you talk to them online that you don't actually have yet. You haven't earned that yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it's a good conversation in real life, but this includes online, but is I'm listening and such. But of course, if you're here in real life, the first few minutes are going to be, I'll be asking you what have you been up to lately? I will have been following your story, different stories in your life. But then again, maybe if I've discovered something this week, like I've been looking more at statues or ornamentation or something like that, I'll say, hey, check this out. And I'll grab a book off the shelf. This is what I'm actually like when you first meet me. And so for some people, I can be absolutely overwhelming if a person doesn't feel strong in there, or just like showing them all this stuff and talking about stuff. For some people, that's just like catnip. It's like, I'm feeding them a fine steak or something.
Yeah.
For someone else, that's just like obnoxious or it's too much. And you always have to kind of judge when you meet someone in the flesh. You really have to judge what kind of person it is. Now, I've had some conversations this way that I will say there to myself, I don't know who this person is at all. I mean, Paul's really good at this, of talking to someone and kind of winding their way into who they are. For me, it takes a lot longer. And
it's his practice as being a pastor. Yeah, it's comes
exactly.
with his
Exactly.
profession. But
Yeah.
also, I just wanted to comment something when he's talking about relationship with Paul. One of the and you said correctly, you cannot have a personal conversation. Although you shared with him few events, you cannot really have this. You didn't earn the time with him, and part of earning the time with him is the geographical location and the access to his person, like life.
Right.
And
Right.
unfortunately, we don't have that, because I live in the south of Israel, you in Tbilisi, and although I really have the strong urge of like meeting you and helping you with your life, there's a certain geographical limitation to that.
Sure.
And
even though we are somewhat closer to each other than I am to Paul,
true,
we've still got a country at war in between us, and we've got countries on either side of that. And those are not countries you can just skip through. You can't just drive from here to there, so it's complex, which is fine.
But it will be the same as if I lived on the coast in Georgia, because then between you and me there is like, I don't know, 3 hours of drive in bad roads of Georgian bad roads. So
the train takes 8 hours. Fortunately, it's super cheap, but
So there's always these limitations in meeting each other, and this is one of the key problems, and I don't think it's a novel problem, of distance and corresponding in distance across a shared culture. So you have that as well during the Roman times. Like one scholar is living in Athens, the other is somewhere in Barcelona, and although they're under the Roman Empire, they have this correspondings and writing letters, and there is a certain weirdness in distant relationship building as well. So unless you and I are neighbors, which put us in a completely different way of interacting with each other, if we actually lived with one another, then it's just a problem. And that brings me to the question, so what is a friend? Who is the person that I can call the friend? And this is what I explored with the people in Landau that I've met, and the stress that a lot of people had, and I as well. And this is maybe my emotional reaction to what happened in Landau.
You got fairly emotional at the end there.
Yes, I did, because there is a problem not a problem, but few of those people I had a few conversations with, but I cannot, I feel really close to them. I can tell them a lot of things that I cannot tell to my Israeli friends, because we in the same shared intellectually, emotionally, we're in the same place, but we are not friends. And I don't know how to reconcile that. The fact that
geography is the main problem here. And one of the things I've learned is that geographically, it is difficult these days in particular, because we will meet people. For instance, many people says, okay, I'm your Facebook friend now. And you met them, you had good conversations, and then they slowly drift off your radar, even though they're your Facebook friend, because that's not really a friend. That's just a
Hmm.
friend. And uh, I think that, but you were talking about the Roman Empire, Athens to Barcelona, but it's much more radical than that. Like in Georgia, it's filled with mountains. So
Hmm.
if you're living in Kakheti and you met someone while you were in Tbilisi who actually lives in, I don't know, Gudauri, you might as well, if you didn't have cars, if you were living prior to the age of the automobile and good roads, and there are some seriously bad roads still here, then you would, that they might as well be Barcelona and Athens.
Hmm.
They're that far away. It's going to take you ages to bridge that gap
Yeah.
between them, even with a horse. So I think there's always a problem of, to me, a community starts geographically. You have geographical connections. So I'm hesitant to use the word, our little corner of the
Yeah.
internet as a community marker, because truthfully, what does anyone know about what I'm doing today? You're the only one who knows anything right now.
Yeah.
And you simply, if I said reached out for help, the only thing you could probably do to help me, or a couple of things. One, you could, who would you know to even call?
Yeah.
So if I started having a heart attack right now, who would you know to call? You'd call around going, yeah, but I don't know where he lives, but
Yeah.
he's having, the other thing is that also, if something were to happen, what can you do? Put your fingers through the tube? No,
Yeah.
you might as well be on the other side of the world, because you're not living here. You're in another country, 4 countries away.
And that one thing in correspondence that not well, basically you cannot tell somebody in corresponding, okay, I'm having a heart attack now, and send them
No,
the letter. So yeah,
no,
so
no. But to
that
me,
this
the
live
real community
element. Mhm.
the real community is in where you are geographically.
Yeah.
So I don't like to use the words the Black community or the Christian community or anything like this. To me, the real community is who's near you and how you interact. And so, for instance, I do have friends here in Tbilisi that, if something came up, I would call this person or that person and say, hey, I have a problem. Can you help me? Or where should I go if I have a medical issue? Or these kinds of questions. And this is what I had in Alaska, to a lesser extent in New York, because of the nature of New York City. It's just so big, and people are coming and going there. I did have friends I could call in the event of an emergency, and I knew how to get that done, but it felt less permanent there than, say, Alaska or here does. Here, it's like everybody has family who are here as well. Which is very different than New York City, where only the hardcore New Yorkers have families that live there in the area, where most of the other people are coming from somewhere else
Yeah.
to be in the city. So I just keep that in mind, so that it gives me no illusions that something is happening that isn't happening. So I don't say,
Yes,
oh, this great community online.
but we still have the longing to belong and to have relationships.
But here's what I'm getting to. But at the same time, I really enjoyed the time at Landau meeting people and putting real flesh and blood on people's faces. Many of those people were Paul Vanderklay's people. I had never heard of them before, but I still, of course, had a lot of great conversations. So I decided at that point, I'm going to do something here next year. As we say in America, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, and
Never heard that.
yeah, it means, if God permits and the water doesn't rise, so
Excellent.
but I think that what I've decided to do is to invite maybe around 12 people, not to be big, not to be open to everyone, and 12 people who really seem to want to talk and explore ideas and such, and invite them here around late September, early October next year.
Mhm.
And whoever can come then comes, because I don't want to do it in the middle of the summer because it's too hot for one thing. And what I most want to show people isn't here yet. And that is, I want to show them the cultural world here. So I want to split the week. Half of the week would be discussing, taking them to a dance, or to watch some of the Georgian dancers and singers practicing. Take them to see my friends who are always practicing their hand shadow puppets. Go to art museums, meet people, talk about art and culture and stuff. The second part would be and I've already figured out where I'm going to do this. What I'm probably going to do very soon is go ahead, provided that the whole Russian thing here that's happened in the last few weeks since the mobilization hasn't caused all the prices to go up too high already. And that, because I think they'll go down again when this era is over. So if that's the case, I'll wait a bit. But to get, for instance, I can get 1, 2, 3 Airbnbs right next to where I live here in different buildings, and have people stay in those and then come over to my place for conversations, and use my place as the launch pad for going out into the world and going to look for cultural things, which we will then, we'll do it in such a way as that we can actually learn about what we're seeing. Then the second thing is to go up into the mountains and again, rent a little cluster of Airbnbs in a very small village. And here's what I have in mind. I haven't decided exactly which way to do this, but spend at least 3 nights there, maybe 4. And on the first full day, like after we arrive and spend the night, the next full day, go out together with everyone. And I have the perfect spot in the mountains just for a gentle hike, a gentle walk. And just let everyone talk and such as they go. People would naturally kind of break down into different groups and such. Then the next day, and then come back at night and talk. After we spent a day kind of seeing things in the natural world and stuff. The next day, purposely break people down into 2 by 2 categories, and a different 2 in the morning than in the afternoon. Let people go and just talk about ideas together, alone or together, but they won't. It's like, you go up that valley, you go to this one, you're going to walk down here. You're going to send people off 6 different directions, and I would try to. And then the third day.
Before you finish the further, just to comment about that, that's exactly what happened to me after Landau. So after Landau, I had another 2 days to travel, to spend in Germany, and somebody Aaron invited me to stay with him. And the day after, we just spent 6 hours walking around Heidelberg and having conversation, and the depth that this guy had. And you just needed to give him time to give you the information, because he's a slow talker and he's developing his ideas slowly. But I was blown away. It was such a tremendous.
Is that the guy who works with Stone?
Stonemans, yes.
I met him and spent a couple hours with him and some other people. But I really enjoyed he and another stone worker friend. I was just like, oh, these guys know what they're doing. This is really great. But then the third day, everyone goes out alone. So now you've had your head swimming with culture and conversations. And now we're going to go out alone to places. And of course, I would watch to see if there's someone there who might have troubles with this scenario. And if they do, we'll put 2 by 2.
Byrne.
But then we come back and spend like alone in the morning, and then maybe spend, the rest of the day and evening. But also we'd be eating together. We'd be spending time with Georgians. We'd be seeing things. And all along the way, I would have various things that we would interact with, that part of the natural world, part of the cultural world, just simply as an injection of conversation. But the point of the conversation would all be, where are we culturally? What kind of ideas do we have here? And not to come up with some big solution, but just to get people really engaged and thinking about it. and I think I could easily find the 12 people, and it wouldn't cost them too much. The biggest expense would be getting here and leaving.
Yeah.
You know, once you get
But
here,
Byrne, I do have the question of why. Why do
because
why do that? Why are you interested in doing that?
because I know that many of the things that have been done in this world that have a deep meaning come from people in small groups who find a way to do something together. And I'm not saying that this group would commit themselves to doing anything together, but it's a way for me to explore who's out there, who might kind of start to catch this thing and a vision for an idea. Because, for instance, I can think of various, both on the good way and the bad way, various things that started in history that, and in the 20th century, that started from small groups of people and eventually grew big. For instance, the reason that there was hippies and punks and the grunge movement and all of that comes from just a handful of people.
Yeah.
And so you have the Beats, particularly Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, and add to it one of their friends, Bob Dylan, add to it one of the group of people he had an influence in changing, the Beatles. Bam, this whole thing happens. And not that I necessarily think that's a good thing, but nevertheless, it doesn't take many people. On the other hand, you could look at C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Barfield, Charles Williams, and these people circling around Lewis in Oxford. And you look how far they are still having reverberations today.
Mm.
And they didn't get together to do that. They just simply got together and shared things. You know, wasn't, I think we might, you know, sometimes I think, okay, we need to try to do something, but at least to look for alternative ideas, and I think bringing people from different, with different perspectives together, who are living in different places. And also, plus they get an exceptionally cool view of a world they've never seen before that I think would do its thing on cue. You know, I often said the same thing about Alaska. It's just like, all you have to do is get here and it's just going to do its thing. All you have to do is witness it, you know.
Well, to Alaska, you wouldn't drag me, but
No,
to
it's too far.
Tbilisi and to Georgia, easily. And
But even
I hope
anywhere
to
in
be
Europe,
one of the 12 disciples.
Well, I definitely consider you up there as one of the first candidates. So, but there was 2 or 3 other people at Landau who I kind of just threw a little flag about this idea, and they're like, you know, and I said, oh, that's what gave me the ideas. I just said, I wish I could do this, and then I said, like, well, why can't I? The only real major expense that people would have, there would be the expense of lodging and such, but frankly, the prices here for that stuff,
amazing. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Even the flights are not that expensive. I just was too bad at looking at them.
But you also hit a time when
now is not the time to look at the prices, but the expenses in Georgia.
Hopefully in a year, the world will still be here.
And I think this is the quality of a New York artist. You know how to live. You found interesting places and know how to appreciate them, which are cheap, culturally rich, and very alluring.
Yeah. Well, the point is, one of the things I learned, and I learned this from going to L'Abri in Switzerland, is that the place is just as important as what happens there. And a lot of people don't understand that. So I thought that the actual place we were in Landau wasn't that interesting. It was good, but it was just very perfunctory. One of the things I noticed whenever I would talk to someone who went to L'Abri in Switzerland, which is still there, is we would talk and I would say, it's the bus ride going up the hill, up the mountain, isn't it? And they go, yeah, that's the thing that just completely blows your mind, because the Swiss bus drivers are just literally hanging on the edges of the mountains, and you're looking at mountains that are like, I don't know, I think the tallest ones in that area are maybe 4,000 meters or something, very tall. And you just break into these valleys and such. And then you get to Switzerland, it's all these old, you get to Labrie, and it's all these old wooden chalets. And just right there, and inside it's this old wood and stuff. Right there, those two factors, and then the fact that everyone there is there because they have questions to ask. And they're exploring things. And now you put those three things together, magic. So the problem is people don't get one of the three. They don't get they don't get the environment. And to really have a good, a meaningful time, you need that the people who come there need to feel they've made a journey, and that that journey is really fascinating. Then they need to feel that they're in a place which, you know, just makes their eyes open. And such. And so the combination here of the cultural stuff, I mean, I think when you see some guy dancing and jumping into the air and landing on his knees and then popping back up, that just right there alone is enough to make you go, really?
But that's the thing about the early monasteries, and in monasteries in general. This is the idea of putting a place, and it's interesting that it's not just in Christian culture; it's also in the Tibetan culture and Buddhist culture, and look, to put this like those places of worship in a very remote places, that it's a journey to go through, and coming with the questions.
Well, there's this one village I want us to go to up in the mountains here that I've been to, spent 3 different sessions there, amount of days. And I just think that it's such an interesting place as far as, I mean, there's so much to do in the small little area. And here's the interesting thing. Nobody ever talks about it. It's not on any, there is a place, maybe about 15 kilometers away, which is where everyone goes to. But they
you don't feel have the feeling that by bringing people and that do connect to the internet, that do speak with each other on the internet, you kind of expose those places to a publicity and then corrupt those places by bringing people there. You don't have this conflict in
I don't think I'm doing that because I don't have enough followers. And for instance,
it always starts somewhere. So that's what I'm asking you. If you have this conflict in yourself.
Not really, because I think what's here is really good, and and now I would be if I was. I mean, there has to be some money to pay for this stuff, but apart from that, as far as it goes, it's relatively cheap. You know, just so. I mean, the food here is relatively cheap. The Airbnbs here are relatively cheap, and what people will end up spending is not that much. But what I'm not, I mean, and Georgia could use a little economy, you know, so they would be grateful too. And in fact, one of the things I'm very interested to do is to introduce some of my Georgian friends to some of the people who would come, because their perspective is very, very different. You know, their society is, you know, it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and you know, they tend to look at things and the conversations I have here are great, and the people here tend to look at things very differently than I've ever looked at them before. So as I tell them, I'm interested in sharing with you what I have, but I'm also interested in learning from you. There are things that we have forgotten, particularly in America. You know, it's just like the way they sing together, or you know, these kinds of things. So my feeling is that I think it would be, and again, 12 people isn't
just the toasts are amazing. The way that they like the things that they say when they
well, I'm going to one tonight, and the only thing I hope is I can eat enough so that I don't get drunk or anything, and because they like to do it, but they also spread it out over like 4 or 5 hours. So but yeah, I think it would be a very good thing, and if it became somewhat regular, that would be good too. It's just
that's one thing about Landau that I'm really proud in, that you got an idea from there to do that, and so for all of us, even the speakers themselves got a certain spark from Alan Dow that this is possible. Those kind of conversation, those kind of encounters are possible.
I think the thing that I'm mostly thinking of is keep it small. Don't invite everybody there, but keep it the people who my feeling is the people who want to come, who really need to come, will come.
Yeah.
Now, if there were like 20, 30 more people who wanted to come,
there's value in exclusion.
Well, there's value in, and for instance, if someone wrote me a certain kind of a letter saying, I would give anything to be there, and had a good reason why, not just wanting to come, but said, I really feel blah, 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 then I would say, okay, well, let's think about this. Is there room for 13? Yeah. But, and I'm thinking, I think on this one, I'm not thinking of inviting any name there. I mean, I was thinking if Paul had the time or something like that, but at the same time, that's not what it's about. It's not about that sort of thing. You can have conferences and festivals for that. This is more something different, and I don't know what it is yet. It's not quite a group tour. It's not a tour. It's something that hasn't got a name yet. And and I think, and it's something I've been thinking about probably for a very long time, but I'm always interested in experiments and this sort of thing, which is what attracted me to puppetry. I had some things I wanted to experiment with, and I got a certain amount of it out of my system. I'm not done by any means, but well, it is getting late here, or early, or midday, or I got things to do eventually. But I've really appreciated talking with you, and let's talk again before the end of the year. And I'm sure there will be more. What's nice is I had some ideas about maybe we could talk about time or some of the other stuff. But I think you're just engaged enough in conversations as is that we could just follow wherever we went.
Yes, that's the best benefit of a good conversation, at least.
Yeah.
You
Plus,
can actually follow.
We already had the benefit of having met each other. In the flesh. Yeah. So that meant that a certain amount of that kind of awkwardness when you first talk to someone online wasn't there. I already had a picture of this is Teddy. Teddy's got a lot of thoughts. He's brimming with ideas. He's got enthusiasm. He also has emotions. This is Teddy, and I'm going, great, let's talk. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, shalom, and we will meet eventually.
We will.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Teddy. Bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I did. And I'd like to, that was another in our series of anadromous conversations, anadromous dialogues. And anadromous, remember, is a word describing salmon swimming upstream. They are anadromous fish, and there are other anadromous fish, meaning they swim against the currents to go spawn upstream, to try to get home to where they started. And that's a good thing to do. Also, while you're here, here's some other good things you could do. You could like. That really helps. The more people like, the better. Share. Yeah, if you think this was good, share it. Subscribe. I need more subscribers. That helps the algorithms. I don't get much money from this because there's always some reason why I can't make any money on these videos. So, and you can contribute. There is a link down below if you feel like donating. Well, anyway, from Tbilisi, this is Byrne, where the Georgians say things like droabit. And droabit means temporarily. That's what it means. It just means the word temporarily. We will meet again soon.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
be just exactly, can these divisions be healed? Because he is the same, as I saw on that podium, as President Trump as he was as candidate Trump. Tomorrow there are hundreds of thousands, what is expected, of protesters to come here, particularly women, the Women's March, to protest Donald Trump as their president. We can get into the issues of that. But it leaves me with a feeling that everybody is still incredibly divided in this nation.
Okay, Nuala, great job today, and thank you very much.